Hello, Sarah Sabin, executive and team coach here in the Leading in the Modern Way video interview series. And I am really excited to have with me here today Tom Geary, who is founder and creative director of School of Thought. Tom, welcome. And would you like to introduce yourself in a few words to my listeners?
Well, great to be here, Sarah. Thank you for having me on. So my name is Tom Geary. I am a creative director. I've been in advertising forever. And in 2009, because my sense of timing is epic, I opened School of Thought, which was, I think, the 299th name we came up with, but it fits us. And ever since then, we've been creating striking creations in a lot of categories, but about 7 years ago, we started doing work in diversity and inclusion. We actually were kind of trying to lead big financial companies to do a female empowerment campaign before it was before anybody else was really. And it didn't work out, but it led us into doing more and more work that we feel really good about, which is how we've become a leader in sustainability, basically ESG. So that's how we got here. And in my spare time, I'm an exceptional dog trainer, as you can see.
Yes, the dog seems very chill at the minute.
Yes,
That
she
could
is.
all change at a
It's
moment.
almost taxidermist, not quite.
I did see her move. I'm going to say.
Yes, we'll send proof of life, I promise.
Okay, so Tom, you have been around and School of Thought has been around since 2009. As you say, quite an interesting time to start. So I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about some of the most significant challenges you faced at the beginning stages of your business and how you overcame them.
So that's a funny story. I was working for I worked for some, really famous ad agencies, Goodby, Ogilvy, New York, McCann, others. And I was actually at McCann running a chunk of Microsoft business. And I've been there for 4 years, and I'm not sort of a type that that really wants to work in a giant corporation. I sort of have the entrepreneurial gene. So a friend of mine called me and he said that he had an opportunity to pitch this consulting company, a global consulting company. And so we started working on the pitch secretly in the middle of the night, and then went to New York for the meeting, presented to the board of directors. They loved it. They hired us. And then it was at that point that they revealed the budget, which was their annual budget for marketing was about, it was barely six figures. And I kind of was like staring across the table at my soon-to-be partner. And I was just like, what have we gotten ourselves into? Like, I've got a newborn. How are we going to make a go of this? Have a 90% cut in salary with, no money. I think our initial budget was $1,500 for like a used printer and a laptop, or I don't know. It was a terrible, terrible start, but we just kind of decided to go for it. And so no loans, just bootstrapped and went and that was the launch of School of Thought. We didn't even have a name. Our first PowerPoint was here's our ad campaign from Tom and Joe. And then, about 3 months later, we came up with the name School of Thought and went from there.
Wow. So what I want to actually highlight from that is it doesn't need to be perfect to just start. And I think this is something that entrepreneurs
there's no perfect. I completely agree.
Yeah.
There's no perfect. When I was a creative running around, I always thought that place over there had to be perfect. At the time when I was like in my 20s and 30s, Goodby Goodby Silverstein was the best ad agency in the US, arguably, and or not even arguably. And finally, I got a call one day, and they wanted me there, and so I went to show up, and I just expected everything was just going to be magical, and it wasn't. It was, they were disorganized, and the projects were great, but they have issues. Everyone's got issues. Every organization has issues. Every client has issues. You can work in-house or externally, independently, as I do. Trade-offs. You've got freedom here, not the budgets. I turned down actually being this is kind of funny. My wife doesn't think it's so funny. I was offered the job of chief creative officer at Salesforce, and I turned it down because I'm an idiot, but also for me, the notion of working on one brand for the end of time was just too limiting. And this was also, about 10 years ago, when they weren't quite the behemoth that they are now. But, every place is limiting. Every place has its issues. Even school of thought.
Well, we're going to get into that in a minute, Todd. But, it's interesting that, a lot of what we see is a facade, and underneath that facade, there's a lot going on that often doesn't get talked about. But the other point I want to pick up on here is that a lot of entrepreneurs get bored with monotony and doing the same thing over and over. And what I'm hearing from you saying, God, I would never want to work on just one brand doing one thing forever. In the capacity that you're in now, you obviously get that variety on a day-to-day basis from working with a portfolio of clients.
Yes, that's the highlight is, we get to work on this client, and then, we've done it 2 or 3 rounds with them, and we're a little tired of it's like a relationship. It's a little tiring, and so you kind of need a break, and so then we're on to a different brand, and then we kind of recharge the batteries and go back to the first one. So having the flexibility is, I think, emotionally rewarding, allows kind of the recharge, and also typically you're going to be able to attract the best creatives, because most creatives, it's kind of a we're talking to somebody on the team was talking about an in-house group that we met with, and we hung up, and the account person turned to me and she goes, "Oh, I guess this is where creatives go to die." And we all kind of laughed, but it is limiting, and it doesn't have to, I'm not talking just about a small tech company. My old boss was working at Apple, and he got up and walked out the door, leaving his coat on the chair behind him. He just had hit his max of doing ads with Garamond type and with a white background. He just couldn't handle anymore, and that's why I turned down the Salesforce thing. It's just, I've worked in-house at Adobe and other big brands, and they're great, and there are lots of good people and so forth, but for many of us it's just too limiting.
So you alluded to it yourself that everyone has their issues. So if we fast forward from 2009 to now, what are some of the problems or issues that are weighing on your mind at the moment?
Well, advertising has always been challenging. I mean, it's great. Somebody came up with the nickname, it's the rock and roll of business. I love the challenge of being able to frame a solution or a message or something in a way that gets people's attention. but I think that we're facing a lot of headwinds. So, for example, the rise in engineering-led solutions, and by that I mean tech firms. You know, when you have a founder who's a kid from Stanford's, uh, business school, or who before that was a coder, um, they, mostly he, are going to, too many he's, are going to lean into coding their way out of everything. Code, code, code. Everything's about the product, the code, the solution, how elegant the interface is, and so forth. It's a pretty insular approach. And it is true that if the offering is amazing at the right time, the product is most important. But they're also blind to the fact that they still have to communicate the offering in a way that makes sense. And so what most people are doing more and more is they're building in-house teams where they're sure that nobody can possibly communicate their offering as well as they can. Well, that's not true, because they lack perspective. It's groupthink. And they're influenced by the leader who is running around talking about the code and how elegant their code is, and the look and feel or whatever. And they're blind to the fact that the most important audience doesn't care about the code. Their target market is a long way from their ivory tower. And so that's an example of, I was talking to somebody the other day who was a marketing director, and he said, frankly, we've got an in-house team and they're not up to it, but I don't know what to do. Like, you could write circles around them, but somebody built this thing up that is more expensive than an external agency, but they're sure that they're the only ones who can do it. The answer is, not only are they not the only ones who can do it, they're not even doing it well. And it takes a certain detachment and thinking not about yourself, but about, the most important thing. What does the audience think? Will anybody care? We have an office in Oakland, and I work remotely a lot, but on our wall, we've got a giant sign that says, "Make them care." And that's the biggest pitfall, I think, in communications. Most people presume interest. It doesn't, and that's what founders think. They think that everybody is going to be as excited about their offering as they are, and that's not the case. So the move in house has been a real problem, Sarah, and I don't know. Yeah, it's. I think there's also kind of a shortage of passionate leaders in marketing. It's hard to sort of put my finger on it. When about 2015, I'll tell you a story. 2015, Charles Schwab, the big investment brokerage, we were doing some work for them, and they came up with a campaign called "Own Your Tomorrow," which is, it's a good line. And they said, "Hey, we're doing an ad on the Golden Globes. What do you think we should do?" And so we were kind of flattered that they asked us to pitch them some ideas. They also were asking the big agency, Crispin Porter, which at the time was probably the best agency in the country. And so they asked us both to come up with a solution, something to do for this global broadcast. And so we looked into it, and we said, there's a real equity problem in Hollywood. And this is before Me Too. This is before Harvey Weinstein. This is before Fearless Girl. We said women are aging out from acting roles at 31, ridiculous, things like that. They're getting marginalized. Why don't you, since it's the Golden Globes, walk the walk on your Own Your Tomorrow campaign and actually do a campaign about empowerment for women? specifically in the context of creativity and storytelling, because it's the Golden Globes. It's about creativity and storytelling. So we suggested, why don't you partner with Reese Witherspoon, who at the time was not the juggernaut that she is now with all of the 75 shows that she's got going and films. She just produced her first movie, which was Wild, the story about the recovering addict who walks the Appalachian Trail, or maybe the Pacific Coast Trail. And so we said, why don't you partner with Reese and have her do a campaign talking about female empowerment and creativity, and then have her run around the country teaching seminars to girls in elementary schools about creativity and filmmaking. And then we came up with the hashtag She Owns It, tied to Own Your Tomorrow. And the reason I'm explaining this is because we pitched this idea and they said no. Mm-hmm. And there were women in the room. There were about 10 people, 3 or 4 of them were women. And they could have been ahead of the Fearless Girl statue. They could have been leaders in everything. And we're not saying, do this exclusively. We're saying do this as a sub-campaign just for the Golden Globes, that you'll be a real leader and you'll walk the walk and so forth. What do you want to do? What do you want to, looking back on one's marketing career, do you want to say that you had amazing, KPIs, or do you want to say that you actually accomplished something substantive? We need to have more marketers who are willing to take risks, modest risks. Schwab can afford it, to actually move the needle on matters and issues that are important. And I can tell you a dozen stories like that where people have whiffed at opportunities to really make a difference. And I think they're going to, you're going to look back at work is work, but why not strive to do something meaningful, as part of the effort. So I'd love to meet more people who really want to go for it and have some level of fearlessness. Marketing is not that big a risk. Coming up with a new car design, what's that cost? $1 billion? That's a risk. Coming up with a tiny portion of your ad budget to do something that could stand for equity or empowerment or making a difference in one way, shape, or another, or just being completely different in one's marketing approach. It's a risk, but it's not that big a deal. And so I wish I could find more of those people who kind of share my mindset.
I really like what you said, and it links into leadership as well, and what is strong leadership. It's about being courageous, it's about taking risks, it's about authenticity and standing up for what you believe in and knowing your values. And I hear all of that from you, and obviously we talked about it quite early on in the conversation about how you care about diversity and inclusion and ESG, business, etc. But what's interesting is that, had you talked to Charles Schwab when all of these movements became trendy, it probably would have been a different conversation. And I get what you're saying. We need more leaders that are prepared to go first, rather than waiting until the trend happens and then jumping on the back of it.
Right. I mean, by definition, it's sort of hard to lead when you're following.
Which is the great irony when companies are often looking around to see what other companies are doing before they act.
Right. I mean, we sort of are 2 pillars for a successful campaign. We talk about wanting to be distinctive and arresting. So arresting, there's no point selling until you have one's attention. So that's always a key to our work. But then we also think that people ought to be distinctive in the space. So how can you be distinctive strategically? And also, how can you be distinctive tactically? So the distinctive example would be Schwab doing a female empowerment campaign when nobody else had done it. that's, impressive. And then tactically, doing a documentary type film would be a little different than sort of the typical ad. So a couple examples of how one can be distinctive. But yeah, it's hard. I think one of the things that I think about in terms of risk and sort of trying to coach people to take it. When I was working at Microsoft, there were 6,400 people in marketing. We would have meetings. It looked like the Dr. No conference room. It was just this massive table. It was, Austin Powers, 100-foot long conference table when I literally kind of 44 clients in one meeting room once. So pretty hard to get anything done. I'm not going to lie. But they had a initiative called the Experimental Marketing Initiative, something like that, where they would put 3% of their annual budget aside and anything would go. And they would deliberately say, nobody pull out the red pen, nobody nitpick, whatever these guys want to do, let's just try it. And it's kind of like a stock portfolio, right? You can have your money in bonds. It's super safe, and then diversify into lots of different asset classes that are conservative in the middle, but take some flyers, 5 or 10%. What the hell? Sure. Let's try, Rivian or Tesla or Netflix or whatever it is back in the day when they're tiny, or, a solar company, something sustainable that's going on in India, perhaps. Indian space tech, there's 300 startups in India. So the point is that there's no harm. I'm not saying go all in on craziness, but there's no harm in having a portfolio type model to one's communications. If that is what it takes to get, the 5 to 10% of risk taking, so be it. I'd rather have more, but give us 5 to 10%.
I really like that analogy to an investment portfolio, because put in terms of investment portfolios, most people would get it. Yes, it makes sense to diversify your asset classes. Yes, it makes sense to have some higher risk and lower risk things in there. So I think that's really helpful to picture. You don't have to go all in on something, but at least you can take some element of risk on something that's more, shall we say, forward looking or trend setting.
Yeah, exactly right. And it doesn't always unfold that way. We did a project for Cisco, and this was more the Maverick model. He didn't care about what everybody else thought. And so that happens too. We had this guy who came to us. He said, I'm tired of the traditional boring work that we're doing. I've got a show in Barcelona, a giant tech conference called Mobile World Congress, 27 times the size of an IKEA, just a massive sprawling, one of the world's largest tech shows. He goes, what can we do that would be different? And so we came up with this idea of having personal assistants running around tied to Twitter. And so you could ask for, a phone charge or help me get a restaurant reservation or whatever. And it was all tied to hashtag WebEx to the rescue. And it blew up and we got 2 million views in 2 weeks, but what was funny is nobody else on his team, they were all just kind of going like this, like, like walking away from this guy. They were sure he was going to get fired because he was doing something that was atypical. And, come on, it was $150,000 for Cisco. It's a rounding error for those guys. It's enormous for some small startups, but for Cisco, they probably spent $5 million on that show or more, maybe 10. And so, this guy spent $150,000 and probably had the biggest impact that anybody in the entire trade show had for his initiative, and good for him.
Yeah. Well, you risk in order to win, and sometimes you lose, but
Sometimes.
the biggest a quote I really like, the biggest risk in life is taking no risk at all.
That's true. That's true. I did a video, it's on my LinkedIn, about, and it started with the premise of an interview with a hospice nurse who was talking about all the regrets that she kept hearing from her patients. And I pivoted it to, I said, what about the risks? What about the regrets you're going to have about your career? Obviously not as important as the other aspects of your life. But you don't want to look back on a career and say woulda, coulda, shoulda either.
Yeah, or blah.
Or blah. Exactly. Exactly.
So final question, Tom. I would love to know if you could go back in time and give one piece of advice to your 20-year-old self, what would that be?
Minoxidil.
I have no
Hair
idea
stuff.
what that is.
No, it's hair. No.
Uh,
What would my 20-year-old self say? Yeah, it's a great question. What do I think I would say? I probably would have pushed myself into film school. Uh, I enjoy. We do a lot of videos, a lot of documentaries. But I probably would have pushed myself into film school. But I think in terms of advice, I would say don't settle.
hmm.
You know, I had somebody who interviewed with me, and he was a great person. We didn't have a position open, and my partner at the time and I took him. We ended up taking him to a baseball game, and I just kind of said to him, I said, don't push yourself into a role that you don't really want to do. I said, ultimately, you're going to be happiest if you don't settle and just kind of keep looking until you find your position. And interestingly, I forgot about this, it was about 10 years ago. And so interestingly, this guy looked me up the other day, and he's now a project manager working at Disney. And he called me up and he's like, the advice you gave me, which I couldn't even remember what the advice I gave him, was right on the mark. So I guess that's kind of an example of, the don't settle thing is advice that I would give others and give my 20-year-old self.
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, and I think you mentioned the 5 deathbed regrets, but I believe one of them was around not going after what was really meaningful to you in life. And essentially, if you're telling yourself, I have to settle, that's just the way things are, you won't have the potential to be all that you could be. So I really like that. Thank you, Tom.
Absolutely.
And thank you for this conversation today. I've really enjoyed it.
I did too.
So, my listeners, I hope you enjoyed this conversation as well. If you would like to be a part of the Leading in the Modern Way video interview series, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you. Bye.